for 3 years, so I got really good at it.
All right, we're live. Wonderful. Normally, friends, we keep the front door open, but today we're not going to do that. So
Thank you.
if the doorbell rings,
I'm happy to be guarding up the door.
thank you very much. We'll do that. So welcome, friends. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and going to grow on. 5. 1, 2, 3.
This guy looks a little suspicious for a minute.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm late.
Don't be silly. Don't be silly, Rob. Welcome. Welcome. There you are, Deb. Welcome all as
I
others.
didn't get any.
No?
Thank you.
As others come to join us, they will. We want to continue our conversation from last time in regards to what we do. Before we get into some of the more specific issues and the differences between how we as Reformed Jews and our other denominations practice things, there's still a great deal of background that we need to go into. Last time we talked about certain background. This time we're going to go through our denominations and give you a sort of a little view as to what they are, the major institutions, and the compare and contrast. So if you don't have a writing utensil, we can get you one to take notes. But that's the idea of today. Oh, great. Pencil pouch. Wonderful.
You can tell she's a teacher.
Yes.
The teacher bag.
Yeah, exactly. You can tell the teacher. It's good.
Come on.
So,
Rabbi,
yes,
I just like to check in with you. Are you doing okay? Because this is you.
I'm fine.
Because this has been a challenging time and there's been a lot going on, and you and Barry were kind enough to open your homes last night, and I'm being carrying committee and Paul
Thank
chair
you.
both right now.
Thank you very much.
Are
Yes.
you doing okay?
We're fine. We had a great deal of support, not only from our temple friends, but also all our clergy in the area. And we feel very comforted and very supported. And I don't know if you guys know, I'm the director of the Interfaith Leaders of Greater Lafayette. And so obviously this goes on the front of my agenda for our meeting on November 8th, which will take place here. So all the churches and mosques and things like that in the area will be coming together as part of the ILGL, and we'll be talking about what we can do from a public point of view. So
I wanted to check in with your
supported.
energy.
Thank you very much. I am, I'm ready to teach and get my mind on the other things. So let's talk about us. How about that? Okay. So I want to talk about us first, and then we'll move on to some of our other denominational friends, okay? Reform Judaism is the largest affiliation in America. About 35% of Jews identify as Reform in this country. There are other shoot-offs from Reform, liberal and Reform in Europe. Reform Judaism in Canada is not necessarily equal to Reform Judaism here, same in the UK, very kind of similar, but there are differences. But this is American Reform Judaism that we're speaking about. Also, one of the oldest of the denominations, the beginnings of Reform Judaism began in the late 18th century, early 19th century. Around that time was the same time that modern Orthodoxy began. There was a split at that point of people who went very far Reform and people who thought, well, kind of, but not really. And then once those sort of branched out, as we see other branches that occur because of that. Conservative Judaism, much later, other forms of Orthodoxy, and finally the newer movements, renewal, Reconstructionists, humanistic, those sort of things, much later. So Reform Judaism has been around for a while. The movement, our movement, focuses mainly on the ethical tradition. I want to make that clear. The ethical tradition over the obligations of Jewish law. Now, last time we talked about Jewish law a lot. Okay, the idea of halakha, the idea that Reform Judaism does not throw away halakha. Everything that we do is based upon Jewish law. Everything that we do, ritual, traditions, holidays, everything has its roots in halakha. The observance of this halakha, of Jewish law, is simply a different interpretation. Some call it the spirit of the law, some call it a different interpretation. But we remember from our last discussion as well that there is a whole range of observation within Reform Judaism, okay? When we say the ethical tradition, Reform Judaism did something that some of the other denominations did not do, and that was to put some primary focus on the words of the prophets. The words of the prophets, if you read them, and we're talking about the major prophets and the minor prophets, not just Isaiah and Jeremiah, but Habakkuk and Amos and all of those people, talk a great deal about social justice, about ethics, about morality, about how to live properly and make this world better. Those were the things that we identified with. We are prophetic in that way. We also certainly are not the first, but certainly the most common understood denomination to take what we would call a progressive view on Jewish tradition, to modernize Jewish tradition. I want to say, make yourself really clear, we're not the first people to do that. We're not the first Jews to do that. In fact, I argue quite heavily that the rabbis of the Talmud in the 5th century did that. Their common era, 2nd to the 5th century, needed some adjustments of Jewish law, how to interpret it, how to do it. We are doing the exact same thing. We are saying these are laws that make sense. Well, what applies to the morality and the ethics and the realistic aspects of this society that we live in? Obviously, we are what one might call politically progressive. We are focused on social justice. We emphasize, besides personal choice and in terms of matters of ritual observance, if you look at some of the statutes of Reform Judaism, they align heavily with what we would call progressive or liberal values. To be able to say that religions aren't political or things aren't politics is ridiculous. Everything is political because people make it political. So if we are for feeding the homeless, that can be political somehow. If we're for welcoming the stranger, that it can be political somehow. So when I say the politic progressive side, I'm not saying we're all Democrats. What I'm saying is most of the statutes of Reform Judaism identify with a liberal view of the world, meaning the acceptance, not just tolerance, the acceptance of people of different identities, races, religions, LGBTQ, all these sort of things. We are progressively pro-choice, which we will talk about later in this course. All these sort of things work that way. The point in terms of Israel, views of Israel, one might say we're politically progressive. But again, this is what the statutes, the ideas say. As we talked about last time, and I want to emphasize that again, the autonomy that each temple has in the Reform movement is very, very important, because there is no, this is how it is. We say so. Rick Jacobs does not rule from on high, from the URJ, and say this is where we stand. That is just not how it works. Jews in New York and California and Indiana all have different issues that they have to deal with, different views that they have to do, and they adapt in that way. So there is a great spectrum of understanding, not just political, religious, and ritualistic, and tradition, all of those ways across the country in Reform Judaism. The things that bring us together as one denomination, one is our focus on social justice. That is everywhere in Reform Judaism. And the idea of informed choice. And we talked about this last time. The idea of informed choice. We don't just do whatever we want because we feel like it. We see the information, the halakha, the tradition, the ritual that's in front of us, and we make that choice to say, how are we going to do it? That is something what I feel is one of the most beautiful aspects of our denomination. I always teach when I'm teaching at intra-religious things, when I'm talking with other people of other denominations, when they say, oh, it's so easy to be a Reformed Jew, I always say it should be harder to be a Reformed Jew, because not only do you need to know the statutes and the observations and the rituals and the traditions, you need to know how to adapt them to modern society. We have to take an extra step that some of those denominations don't have to do. You should know it and then know what to do with it. It should be the hardest denomination to be a part of. We should be the most well-informed denomination that there is. So that's part of my job here. Some of our major institutions that I want to talk about, a little bit about them. The first is the URJ. Okay, we have CCAR. We have the RAC. We have HUC, JIR. You are bombarded by acronyms. So the URJ is the Union for Reform Judaism. This is what we would call the governing body of Reform Judaism. By governing body, we mean that there is a president, there is a vice president, there were at a time regional directors, there are social action people, there are technological people, there are things in place to help congregations everywhere as part of the URJ. The URJ, like temples, Reform temples, frankly, everywhere in the world, is shrinking. Budgets are shrinking, and so whereas 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, every region of the states had a regional director who knew all the temple presidents, and they came all the time. There was much more interaction with the URJ. That's just not how it is anymore. And now they're trying to figure out what to do with that gap. Okay, there is a huge gap now in Reform Judaism between the leadership of the governing body and the autonomy and the understanding of the congregations. And so obviously you can go on URJ, reformjudaism.com or org, whatever it is, and you can read about what things are doing. You can write, rabbis write things, you can do that. There's resources available, but the human to human stuff just isn't there anymore. So we're not sure of the fate of the URJ. Temples pay dues to the URJ, just like congregants pay dues to temples. The URJ helps fund HUC, which we'll talk about. The RAC is part of it. So it's a huge, huge umbrella of the reform movement. Some things that the URJ says we may agree with, others we may not. Okay? For the most part, we do, because we've had some great leaders. Okay? I'm going to go over here to the RAC. The Religious Action Center. The Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism is what we would call our political arm. This section of our governing body deals specifically with political implications for what we want to do. These are the people who march to DC. These are the people who immediately, when something happened, like yesterday, were there speaking out. These are the people who get close to politicians, who lobby to Congress or Senate or whatever it is for the views that we as liberal Jews would like to see. It is based upon all the ideas and statutes of Reform Judaism. If there is something that is going on in the world and Reform Judaism agrees, our government representatives hear about it. If we disagree, you bet they hear about it. There are statements that are made that speak out against things that occur in the secular world, in the political world, in the interreligious world, into the Jewish world. The current director is Jonah Pesner, who was the senior vice president of the URJ. Before him, the founder of the RAC, David Saperstein, an incredible, incredible rabbi, basically grew the RAC and built it. To give you a few things about what the RAC has done in history, inside the building of the RAC was where the Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Acts in the 1960s were signed, drafted and signed. We marched with Martin Luther King and we helped draft legislation to give voting rights to African Americans. That is only the beginning. That was in the 60s. As you can imagine, we've done quite a bit more since then. But that is the idea of what we do. It's not just for Jews. As we talked about Reform Judaism before, we have an outlook outside of our religion. Love your neighbor does not mean love your Jewish neighbor. It means your neighbor, whoever that is, humanity's causes. Okay, Reform. The Religious Action Center is our stronghold arm for humanitarian issues in that way that can be seen as political, if that makes sense. The Central Conference of American Rabbis. Central Conference of American Rabbis. Certainly associated with the other denominations, but it's its own, thank goodness, its own being. The Central Conference of American Rabbis is exactly what it sounds like, a bunch of rabbis getting together. The Central Conference of American Rabbis, which is also historic, almost as historic as HEC and URJ, is what I am a member of. This congregation is a member of the URJ. I am a member of the CCAR, and we work together. The CCAR determines where we stand from a rabbinical point of view on things. If you want to know where we stand on kashrut, the URJ finds out by asking us, because we're the rabbis. We issue those statements, where we stand on Shomer Shabbos, where we stand on this or that. Whenever there is something that occurs, you'll see 3 statements that come out, URJ, RAC, and CCAR. Mostly they say the same thing, but from very different sources. One is from a congregational point of view, one from a political point of view, one from a rabbinical point of view. As we talked about last time, the idea of responsa, if we remember the idea that where we get the ideas of how to encounter new aspects of Judaism when they come our way. There is questions that occur. What do we do if blank? A question might occur. What if my spouse is not Jewish? Can they come up and read the Torah blessings for a bar mitzvah? That's the thing that you send out. The CCAR has a committee on the response committee of very, very brilliant and well-known and well-studied rabbis who respond. And the answers, as always, are super long, okay? Because it is not just yes or no. It is here's what the rabbis say, and here's what okay, and here's what that guy said, and here's what we think, okay? They are very, very thoughtful responses, and they are open to the world. CCAR response, so you can look up, you can Google online. Yes, Brian?
Okay, is the organization for the rabbis, is that something, let's say, like a professional union almost?
I'd like to call it a union,
like
but it's
AMA,
not.
But because they set kind of the guidelines, the policy,
Correct,
and the membership or whatever.
correct. And we do pay. We pay our own dues. It is not a union, however. They cannot protect us in any way.
But I mean, okay, let's say for mission or policy directives on which way to. So a lot of the directions or whatever would be made, let's say, would be set there that so individual, let's say, temples or rabbis, let's say, they have to like kind of go in line, or can they speak out against it?
Always, you can speak out against it. These, of course, like anything else, Brian, are recommendations from a governing body. This is a rabbinical governing body, and so at the CCAR conventions, we vote on where we think things should go. This is what they propose. They have its own board, and we vote. There have been plenty of things that the CCAR has done and voted on that I think are ridiculous. There are other things that I think are great and wonderful. But overall, just like the URJ, just like the RAC, the idea is to encompass as many as possible and to provide a resource in that way.
Thanks.
Yes, Beth.
CCAR, I think all of them know this. Well, maybe you don't because you weren't here, because we've done a couple of rabbi searches, but CCAR is very instrumental and very generally helpful with regard to rabbi searches as well.
That is true.
We have reached out to CCAR several times. I mean, I won't go into details, but.
No, that's good to bring up that.
That's an aspect.
I think from a congregational point of view, yes, they are helpful. From a CCAR point of view, it is the only way really to get a job in URJ congregations, which frankly, a lot of us have a problem with. There is what's called CCAR placement. URJ congregations place themselves up on the CCAR things and they say, okay, we're available and we're only going to go through Reform rabbis who are members of the CCAR, and there's steps you have to do, and there's this you have to do, whatever it is. Whereas in the rest of the world, you want a job, you go apply. So, yes.
So, do they set membership requirements that determine like what kind of determine what kind of rabbi you can be? Like in terms of if you want to get a job and you have to be a member, then is that how they kind of decide requirements for rabbis?
Kind of. There are equivalents in the other denominations, which we will talk about. the Rabbis' Assembly and these sort of things like that. The CCAR basically says if you want to be a rabbi at a Reform congregation, you should probably be a member of the CCAR. There are exceptions where CCAR rabbis will work outside URJ congregations and non-CCAR rabbis will work inside Reform congregations. Those are the exceptions to the rule. The common, which is most understandable, is to keep everyone together.
All
Okay.
you have to do is sign up, or is there something?
Oh, no. I mean, you have to be, you actually have to be ordained from a legitimate institution, such as HUCJAR, which we'll talk about. So yes, to answer that question, yes. So Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion. That is our full name of our seminary, Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, because the Hebrew Union College merged with the Jewish Institute of Religion. So this is the only Reformed seminary in the world, in the country, in that way, in terms of the American Reform movement. There are other liberal and Reform seminaries throughout Europe and places like that, wonderful places like that, but this is the American one. There are campuses of HUCJAR in Los Angeles, New York, Cincinnati, Ohio, and Jerusalem. We have a presence throughout the country. In order to get into HUC, there are requirements, certainly of theological understandings of being Reformed, but also Hebrew requirements. There is a huge interview process. There is a psychological test. There's all kinds of stuff to make sure that when you get to your URJ congregation, you don't go crazy. So, and most of the time it works. So, but once you are graduating from HUC, you immediately, automatically get a probationary membership to CCAR. You prove yourself for a couple of years and you stay a member. Yes?
Is it like grad school, or is this like undergrad?
This is grad. So HUCJAR, the seminary program for Reform rabbis is 5 years of post-college work. So you are required to have a college degree. You're required to take things like the GRE or whatever it is. You're required to have all those work experience and things like that, and then you go to seminary for 5 years. It is relatively standard in terms of these ideas of denominations of how long a seminary time would be. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot to do. The first year is in Jerusalem for obvious reasons. You get thrown into a Hebrew world, so everything is Hebrew, and you're learning archaeological stuff at the archaeological sites. You're getting first-hand sources and knowledge, and then you get to choose your campus. New York and Los Angeles, for obvious reasons, are hubs, are Jewish hubs. Cincinnati, Ohio, was really one of the first birthplaces of American Reform Judaism. If you look at the history of Reform Judaism, Isaac Mayer Wise and David Einhorn, places like this, function in that way. And so it is one of the oldest campuses, and it is a wonderful campus. It's the one that I went to.
And an amazing Saturday morning service.
An amazing Saturday morning
I've been
service.
privileged to attend it.
So once you have all these together, you have all the steps necessary to be part of the Reform movement. And they may not all agree with each other at all times, but most of the times we do. HUC grads become CCAR, and we work for URJ, and we hang out with the rep. So, yes.
I just like to say the WRJ is an offshoot of URJ.
Sure, absolutely. And there are other offshoots of the URJ. WRJ is one of them, absolutely. All of these have other sort of offshoots that happen. These are the big governing bodies. But yes, absolutely. Thank you, Carol. I think that merits mentioning, okay? Okay, so, and again, we're just going to go over sort of the basics there from this point of view. Let's move on to our conservative friends. Conservative Judaism arose out of, that was my computer, yeah? Just a reminder that I have class to teach. Thank you, computer. So the conservative movement arose, as you could imagine, when Reform Judaism was built and modern Orthodoxy and Orthodoxy was built. Someone said, we need something in the middle. So, conservative movement, it's known as the conservative movement in the United States. Conservative. Anywhere else in the world, it is called the Masorti movement. Masorti is a word literally that means traditional. Again, with conservative Judaism or Masorti Judaism, there is a wide range of observance. It is one of the newer, it's 19th century, newer movements. However, we'll say that the observance in conservative Judaism is a little more observant. There are statutes and things like that that they hold from a different interpretation that we do that go a little bit farther towards orthodoxy. It is the midpoint. It is the spectrum of observance between Orthodox and Reform. At least it was when it was formed. These days, it is hard to tell, which we'll talk about more and more. However, we'll talk about a few things that conservative Judaism, to give you an idea, where they stand on a few things. It is okay to drive to synagogue if you're a conservative Jew. Gender and egalitarian prayer still exists in conservative Judaism. Women rabbis, men and women pray together, women read Torah, all of those wonderful things. They've also made strides in LGBTQ welcoming. If you look at the resolutions of Reform Judaism, meaning we ordain women, we ordain LGBTQ, we ordain transgender, we do same-sex marriage, whatever it is, conservative Judaism is roughly, on average, 4 or 5 years behind us. They will have a resolution about 5 years later. Hooray. We do something in 1978, they do something in 1982. So they're getting there, okay? Things like kashrut, kosher, they're a little more strict on their interpretation than Reform Judaism. Intermarriage is not such an easy situation in conservative Judaism, which I believe has been a big factor, frankly, in their shrinking of their movements. Reform Judaism has been incredibly embracing of intermarriage, of interfaith marriage. Conservative Judaism, at least certain points, has not. What I mean is certain, for the most part, will bar their rabbis from performing interfaith weddings. Okay. There are rabbis across the board who believe in interfaith and do it anyway, but we're talking about from a government body standpoint. Okay. When Reform Judaism is asked about interfaith marriages, we give you a yes, no, maybe. Depends. Answer. Conservative Judaism basically says no. But it has sort of caught up a little bit with that, and I want to make sure that we understand conservative Judaism the right way. That how conservative Judaism was 10 years ago is not the way it is today, just like Reform Judaism. Okay, we want to make sure that just like any other movement, we see that it is progressing, and there are voices within it that make it a little more liberalized.
Can you elaborate on that point about Reform giving you a yes, no,
Sure.
maybe answer?
Yes. So Reform Judaism appreciates and understands interfaith marriage. The reason why is because we do not hold Judaism to be only genetic in terms of matrilineal or patrilineal descent, which means that if your mother is Jewish, that's great, but do you practice as a Jew? That's important. Right? So is your father Jewish? Hooray, whatever. Are you a Jew or not? It's not just where you come from genetically. There's another step in terms of, do you go to synagogue? Do you practice? You identify as a Jew, which means that, David, that if a Jew wishes to marry a non-Jew, the question for us is, what's your family life is going to be like? Not necessarily if you're going to have kids. You don't necessarily have to have kids. Are you going to embrace a Jewish lifestyle? If you're not, and that's fine, I'm not the guy to marry you, right? Right? There's great priests and preachers who can do it, right? The reason why you want me underneath that chuppah is because you want Judaism to be a part of your marriage, right? If you don't, then I don't want to be there, right? The kids, obviously, in terms of raising your children, that's an important factor too. There are certain Reform rabbis who make you sign something that you're going to raise your kids Jewish or something like that. Some don't. But the idea is if I'm going to sign my name as a Reform rabbi on your wedding certificate, you better stay Jewish in some way, right? So that is a yes, no, maybe sort of situation. Yes, if is how I usually do it. Am I the right guy? It is not the right reason for me to marry you because your Bubba wants me to marry you, right? What matters is, what are you going to do, right? It's not a Shonda that the rabbi wasn't there. It's what are you going to do 50 years later when she's gone, okay? Like, it's your marriage. So that's what I mean, okay? So that you know, and this number might be outdated, but about 18% of American Jews are conservative, identify as conservative, and I think that might be high, honestly. Conservative movement is not doing well. So, their major institutions are actually very similar to ours, okay? JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary, is very much like our HUC. It's the same number of years. They do a year in Jerusalem. Same sort of idea, honestly. Many of our professors historically have taught at both. People start at JTS, go to HUC, and vice versa. It's actually a wonderful relationship in terms of that. The United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, the USCJ. The United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism is their version of the URJ. Okay. The Rabbinical Assembly. The Rabbinical Assembly is their version of our CCAR. So they put out their own responsa, they put out their own understanding in that way. So it's very easy to, if you want to see where we stand or where we're different, we're the same, is to look up CCAR responsa and Rabbinical Assembly responsa. Okay. Besides JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary, there's another school called Ziegler. Actually, very cool. A couple of our friends started out at HUC and popped over to Ziegler because they're sort of in the middle. It is a very sort of liberal side of conservative in terms of that seminary. It's a very cool place. So, yeah.
Where does Boston Hebrew College fall in there?
Non-denominational.
Okay.
Yes.
We looked at them.
Yes, non-denominational is
Rabbi.
Boston Hebrew, is
Yeah.
Hebrew College, yes.
Okay.
So I have friends who have graduated from there. They're mostly Reform or Reconstructionist. Yes.
Now, let's say the modern conservatives, are they considered, let's say, right of center or left of center? Because then there's, let's say, I've heard that there's modern orthodoxy. So if they're
There is.
left of center, then how different is if they're going?
Books have been written on this, my friend. So yes, you have Reform over here and you have Orthodoxy over here.
Right.
Okay. In theory, okay, you have conservative here, but that's not necessarily true because you have modern Orthodoxy and you have other Orthodoxy and you have all this stuff right here. It moves back and forth depending on where the movement goes. Okay. Right now, let's say when it was formed, we'll say Reform is over here and conservative is over there. Right now, we're about here. We're pretty close. Okay, we're very, very close.
In what terms, let's say, the movement, is it the times, is it the political times, is it?
Both, everything.
Or,
Everything influences a movement. So where where we move as a nation, where we move as in leadership, where we move in terms of progress, right? Where we were in 1960 is not where we are now in anything, right? So where we are in the 80s is very. We learn new things. We decide new things. We resolve new things. We grow and we change and we evolve. Okay. So yeah. So it's a complicated question you're asking. I want to try and answer it as best as possible.
Okay.
But the truth of the matter is, conservative Judaism is just not in the middle anymore.
And aren't there fewer Jews that are going into that movement?
Yes. That's why I mentioned they're not doing well.
Yeah.
Right now, and I talk about this a lot, but I'll say it very quickly. Right now, you have Reform Judaism, which is becoming more a little bit towards conservative, and Orthodoxy with modern Orthodoxy coming like that. But instead of all of us joining conservative Judaism, they're all coming this way. So they're being pulled right at the center. The conservative conservatives are going to modern orthodoxy. The liberal conservatives are coming over to us. And what's left is, they're sort of stuck in the middle there. So
the net
yeah.
result then would be the polarization.
Yes, of religiosity in America.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly the cause. Yes.
So the sons of Abraham, conservative.
Conservatives. Conservatives.
It really
Their
depends.
leadership says conservatives. And the reason why is because you have one egalitarian service and one not.
Okay.
A conservative shul will not have a shul, a Saturday morning service like David Sanders runs on Saturday morning. Absolutely not.
But my understanding is, and I know quite a few members there, is just lots of us. The Orthodox contingent, and I don't think we should be talking about sons, but the Orthodox contingent of that membership is small in comparison to the people that identify as conservative. That's today's reality there.
10 older.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the more Orthodox are the older members, and the younger and middle-aged even members are more to the conservative end.
Are they members of any governing body? I don't believe so.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. So it's hard to say.
And they don't have a rabbi.
Right. But so to give an example, outside of our local community, there are lots of communities out there that don't necessarily identify with one that would be just URJ or just, United Synagogue. And so they find themselves somewhere in the middle and they're not affiliated. They're called unaffiliated congregations. So Sons of Abraham is what we call an unaffiliated congregation. Very hard to define.
One other question. Then how would you classify, let's say, Lubavitch? Is that a separate, or is that?
Lubavitch Chabad?
We're going to get there, right?
Oh, we're going to get there. That's Orthodox, yeah.
That's a whole different animal.
Yeah.
Don't worry, it's on my list, my friend. It's on my list. We'll get to Chabad, don't worry. So Orthodoxy, okay? Obviously, they don't call themselves Orthodoxy, we do. Okay, they call themselves right. All right? So Orthodoxy is exactly what the word itself means, okay? Our Christian denominations have Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox and whatever it is, okay? It's what you would call the most observant, I don't like saying traditional because that's nonsense, the most observant understanding of Jewish law, the strictest understanding of Jewish law as interpreted by what we would call the rabbinic authorities over the centuries, okay? In Orthodoxy, in most Orthodoxy, I would say, I don't want to paint everything with a wide brush. In most Orthodoxy, you have one rabbi who says, this is how it goes. That's it. No discussion. This is what it says. This is the interpretation, okay? About 10% of American Jews are Orthodoxy, and that number is growing, as a matter of fact. Again, because of the religious polarization in America, people are going more Orthodox or more, honestly, non-religious at all, okay? If I were to be truthful, it is fundamentalism versus atheism right now in America. We are all stuck in the middle, okay? Large families is not just a stereotype. That is part of their culture to repopulate after the Holocaust. So the idea of large families in Orthodoxy is a very important cultural aspect of who they are. And statistically, Orthodox Jews give birth to Orthodox Jews, meaning they grow up and stay Orthodox Jews. Whereas I think modern denominations, Reform, Conservative, we go all over the place. Orthodox Jews, for the most part, again, I cannot paint them all the same way. I would never do that. When we certainly get into the ultra-Orthodox, things like that maintain themselves in small, isolated communities, even in North America. So when people say there's lots of Jews in Brooklyn, that's not just happenstance. It's because Orthodox communities stick together, okay? For the main reason, and the fact that imagine you can't drive on Shabbat. You got to walk to shul, which means you got to live near shul, which means all of you have to live around shul. So that's really the starting point. If you want to go worship, you have to live in that area, which is walkable, and so you have to do that, okay? Back in medieval days, it was the church. The church was the center of town. Everyone lived around it. We took the same idea. The synagogue is the center of the universe for a Jewish community, okay, for an Orthodox Jewish community. It is going to be subdivided, so we're going to subdivide it, okay? But that is the idea when we say orthodoxy. Okay, the strictest understanding of it. Okay, so let's talk about modern Orthodoxy. Let's see. Okay. In the 18th century, this is when what we would call the Jewish Reformation occurred. We call it the Haskalah. Okay? So it's basically our Reformation. Okay? We discovered secular studies, math, science, logic, philosophy. We started to assimilate, and we realized we can do things with other people, and we can live with it, and that has repercussions that happen. We dress differently, we act differently, we speak different languages, we learn different things, we send our kids to secular schools. All these sort of things started to happen. Okay, now imagine what that does. One, you get reform, which fully embraces it. Great, assimilate the crap out of us, okay? Modern Orthodoxy said kind of, okay, kind of. People like Moses Mendelssohn wrote wonderful stuff, very, wonderful ideas about what it meant to be a Jew at home and whatever it was out in the street. Okay, certainly in Germany at the time, in the 18th century, 19th century Germany, to be a German outside and a Jew at home. Meaning you could be both. Okay. The motto of their institution is the best way to set this up for you. Their institution, by the way, is Yeshiva University. You've heard of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's in New York, okay? Their, what did I just say? Motto. Their motto, okay, is Torah. How do they spell it in transliteration? Okay. Mada. Literally, Torah and secular knowledge. Okay. Their version of the CCAR is called the Rabbinical Council of America.
And Yeshiva University is male only, correct? Or are
Yes.
they, yeah.
Yes, I believe so. They are not yet at that spot. Their version of the URJ is the Orthodox Union. Okay.
What was that again? Torah plus?
Secular knowledge. Mhm. Yes.
Question, okay,
Yes.
okay, you said the Yeshiva University is just male only. What about, let's say, the Yeshiva schools? Isn't that more modern?
The yeshiva schools are different than Yeshiva University. Yeshiva is
But isn't it an outgrowth of?
kind of yes and no, not really. Yeshiva University, I actually don't know if it's male only. I do know that modern Orthodoxy, like most Orthodoxy, embraces, I would say, 99% male only rabbis. I cannot paint them, all over. There are women who have fought their way to the top to be modern Orthodox rabbis, but it is still a struggle for them.
But the Yeshiva educational system is totally separate.
In theory.
You're talking about
Yes.
like elementary and high
Yeah.
school? Yeah, they're still, I think, gender segregated.
I think so in certain ways. Some of them,
Yeah.
again, some of them yes, some of them no. Day schools are different, that sort of stuff. Okay. So that's modern Orthodoxy. Then we move over to our Hasidic friends. Okay, Hasidic. They are a different offshoot of the what happened in the in the West. We had the Haskalah. In the East, we had this spiritual revival, which focuses on mystical tradition. You will see, besides the observation, obviously the observantness of Hasidic Jews. Those Hasidic Jews typically are the ones who are dressed in full medieval garb with hats, payas, black suits, all that stuff, okay? The thing that separates Hasidism from some of the other Orthodox denominations is the idea of joy. They are the happy-go-luckiest Jews you will ever meet. Everything is mystic. Everything is joyous. Everything is beautiful. It is wonderful to see. If you go to Jerusalem, they are dancing, dancing, dancing. They go crazy. They drive around vans blasting loud music. It is amazing, okay? They have embraced charisma. They have embraced joy and music and mysticism. A great deal of some of the best Jewish tales we have are Hasidic tales. Great folk tales, great mystic lessons, ideas about the Baal Shem Tov and things like that, the magic behind Judaism. It is a beautiful understanding of it. It is also extremely observant, extremely strict. Yes.
The Baal Shem Tov, is
Yes.
that like their leader?
It was an old like mystic rabbi.
Oh, okay.
They have, just like most Orthodoxy, they have one rabbi who says, this is how it goes. One Rebbe. This is the same for Chabad as well, okay? And some others, all right?
Are they the Kabbalah Jewish people? Or,
No, Kabbalah is a
because that's mysticism, right?
it is, but Kabbalah is the mystic texts and understandings of Judaism, not a sect of it.
Okay.
Okay? I would put, and I think this is correct, yes. I would put Chabad under this, okay? I would put Chabad underneath Hasidic. It is a offshoot, okay, of Hasidism. Simply, they have a different Rebbe, okay? That's Lubavitcher, okay? Other ones that you might not hear about as much is Satmar, Ger, and Skver.
Do they get along, all the different subgroups?
No.
I mean, here's the thing: Jews get along, but the ideas of who's, that rabbi says one thing, that rabbi says another thing. We think this, we think that. So, and how many grow, and is it Israeli based? Is it American based? Is it European based? It's all very cultural in the same way that we are, right? It's not that we hate Canadian, UK Reformed Jews. It's just we do things different. Same way. Okay, Chabad and the other denominations do things differently, think differently. Okay, yeah.
So let's talk for a minute about what it's like to be a Hasidic or Chabadic woman.
Okay.
I mean, they're happy.
We will go into great detail about women's roles and women's rights and those sort of things in this class. I want to spend a whole class period on that.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Very good.
But I agree that
I've done a lot of
warrants
reading.
discussion. It warrants discussion. Right now we're doing an overview, but reason why I want to give you an overview, because we will discuss things like that. We will discuss kashrut. We will discuss Shomer Shabbos. We'll discuss women. We'll discuss LGBTQ. Okay, all of those things through these lenses. But I want you to know the lenses first. Okay.
Let's maybe just throw out, because you mentioned how they have large families.
Same thing. Same as
That there,
Orthodox.
yeah, but that there still is arranged marriage.
There is arranged marriages. Yes.
They had
For the most part, sometimes yes, sometimes no. It is very, what we would say, tradition-based, meaning not tradition, Jewish tradition, meaning cultural tradition, okay? Meaning where things were in Eastern Europe, the way things were done still resonates with them in a large way, okay? Yeah.
So you said, like, in terms of people getting along, would they think that we're not Jewish?
Yeah.
We'll talk about that too. We'll talk about that too. Who thinks who is what, right? That's going to be a whole class period. I think I just named it. Right. Who thinks who is what? To short answer your question, no, they would not recognize this as a legitimate denomination of Judaism. Nor conservative, nor reconstructionist, nor renewal, or humanistic would they recognize as legitimate.
Not even
Okay.
conservative, huh?
No. So if that gives you a great idea about which way the lines go, okay? So when people say, why can't we all get along? That's why. So seriously, I mean, someone doesn't literally believe that you are good enough to be called a Jew. That's not someone I'm going to sit down and break bread with.
It's kind of unusual in a way, because that would be the equivalent of other denominations of Christianity not considering
Which they do.
Denominations, Christian.
Which they do.
Oh, do they?
Yeah. All 30,000 of them. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought they all considered themselves Christian.
they,
Oh,
they
no.
consider themselves Christians, but you're not right. Neither she. You have to believe my way.
That's even more confusing.
Yeah.
And we're talking about religion. Remember, it's all about the who says what, right? I say you're not Christian enough, and I say you're too Christian. It's the same, same thing that happens in Judaism and everywhere else, and Islam as well, right? I mean, in every Eastern and Western, right? We have who says who as well. Okay. This is very small, but I wanted to mention it anywhere. Yeshivish or Haredi. Okay. It is also known as Litvish. They literally consider themselves opponents. Okay? They reject Hasidism. Okay? Okay, so when the Eastern mystical tradition and all of that started to go with Hasidism, Haredim went the other way. They, instead of mysticism, are much more intellectually based. Okay, rigorous Torah study, Talmud study. Okay, it's not about the folk tales and the Kabbalah, it's about Torah and Talmud study, intellectual growth, okay? Also, these are all under orthodoxy, okay? So again, from the observance point of view, from cultural understandings and things like that, we're talking about heavy kashrut, heavy shomer Shabbos, women's roles diminished, men only, yeshivas and men and women separated in worship, all these sort of extremely observant things, which we will go over piece by piece throughout the year, okay? Those are our orthodoxies, okay? Oh, sorry, I forgot one. Open Orthodox. That's our last one, Open Orthodoxy. Okay, that's the newest, okay? Founded in the 1990s. We're talking new, okay? Super new, okay? They are what they consider themselves a reaction to the shift to the right among the modern orthodoxy. So this open orthodoxy, which differs from modern orthodoxy, okay, this is a newer sort of offshoot, does embrace roles for women, spiritual leadership, and has more openness in terms of that ideas, in terms of LGBTQ ideas, than most other Orthodox denominations, okay? And openness to us, to non-Orthodox Jews.
It does seem like
Okay.
all these other denominations are looking at us saying, kind of like what they're doing.
Some say that, some say the opposite, right, Rob? Open Orthodoxy has developed a lovely partnership with Reform and Conservative Judaism, not an official partnership, but we understand each other, and it's much more open in that way. Same way in modern Orthodoxy, okay? Institutions like Ziegler, and then their institution, which is called Chovevei Torah. Wonderful people who go to Chovevei Torah. Brilliant, like-minded, modern people who just view other aspects of the religion to be more orthodox. But in terms of openness, yes.
Why do you think they would not just move to Reform Judaism?
Oh, lots of reasons. Oh my goodness. I mean, there is a huge jump between being open to non-Orthodox Jews and becoming a non-Orthodox Jew. So working together in partnership and things like that is very different from embracing it together. As Reform Judaism, however, Carol, as Reform Judaism moves a little bit more towards conservative, you might see a little bit more of that, yes and no. Chovevei Torah, I've seen people go back and forth as well, just like Ziegler in terms of HUC and things like that. Usually they decide the values of Reform Judaism we like, the observance we don't, if that makes sense. right?
Yeah.
Open Orthodoxy has the same values in terms of that openness, egalitarianism, equality, but they still won't eat pork and they still won't drive on Shabbos and they still, that sort of those aspects of it. And they might have a more traditional understanding of Torah and law and that sort of stuff. Okay.
How many congregations are there in Open?
There's not a lot.
Never
I
heard.
mean, it's less than 30 years old, right? So, but it's there. And it's becoming significant.
Is it more prevalent in certain parts of the country, do you think, or?
Not that I'm aware of. I
Okay.
would say I don't want to say one or the other, but I would say Northeast for the most part. But I would say everywhere. I mean, it all depends on who wherever the Chovevei Torah or whoever does ordain someone, they send them to wherever they go, and that's where they go. Okay, so reconstructions. We'll do these guys pretty fast. We're running out of time. Okay, Reconstructionist, renewal, and humanistic. Okay. Reconstructionist. This is our friend Mordecai Kaplan. Mordecai Kaplan. This was founded in the mid-20th century, so pretty new. But very well established at this point. Okay. He was, I'll put this, this is an interesting part that I'll mention. He's religiously progressive, and Kaplan was the first American rabbi to preside over a public bat mitzvah ceremony. Okay? His daughter, to be fair, it was his daughter, in 1922. Okay?
So we knew Judith's,
Judith Kaplan. Yeah.
not her, I'm not that old, but I knew her granddaughter. Who
Yeah.
belonged to our congregation in DC. Yeah.
Great. Right. So they understand evolution and evolution of progress, what I mean. They have varying opinions in terms of Jewish law, the mitzvot, in terms of what is obligatory and what is not. So they accept gay students. They are a movement which usually when people ask me where they are, usually I say reforms here and conservatives there, and they're sort of in the middle there. Sort of. It's hard to say. Some of the things that they think are very conservative, and some of the things they do, and some of the other things that they think are very reform, but they don't define themselves in that way. Reconstructionist rabbis do quite well in Reform synagogues. I've seen it happen. And sometimes Reform Jews say, I kind of like the Reconstructionist view. It is not necessarily, it's hard to say Reconstructionist is a different denomination. It is, obviously. But it is just a different viewpoint of what we would say a progressive Judaism. Some things they agree with, some things they don't. I mean, it's just, but it deserves some attention. It's a very, it's growing and it's getting there.
We belong to a Reconstructionist congregation in California.
Reform Jews do fine in Reconstructionist
And actually, the
congregations.
rabbi that was there when we first joined had been in an HUC ordained.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
And he was
So that's what
fabulous.
if that gives you an idea, is HUC rabbis go to Reconstructionist congregations, Reconstructionist rabbinical college kids go to URJ congregations, Reform and Reconstructionists go back and forth. It is just a different sort of aspect of the sphere within our own, view. Okay. So that's 1922-ish, early 20th century. Renewal is 1960s-ish, okay. This is the Renewal Judaism. Okay, Renewal Judaism, the best way to put it is Hasidic observation plus Reform values.
Mhm.
Okay? Ecstatic, musical, mystic prayer. They dabbled in the 1960s, what we would say, counterculture. Okay?
Oh, yeah.
They are
So the hippies.
hippy dippy. Okay? They are our Jewish hippies. Okay? So they are gender egalitarian. They are environmentally conscious. They are progressive in terms of politics and religious diversity. But they are not Reformed Jews. Okay? They are what I would say even more so progressive to the left than we are. Perhaps louder about it, we'll say. It's a very small movement, but it's there. Okay? Wonderful music comes out of the renewal movement. But certainly a counterculture atmosphere. You know, and I don't mean this in any way pejorative, but it's very flower girly. You know, it's
It
very
is.
dancey and hippie and
Yes.
you know. But the reason why is that's I mentioned is because it's very close to Hasidic in that way. It is very embracing of spirituality, right? You get into it in a way, but it is extremely progressive versus the Hasidic ideas, which are not. Okay.
We knew
Yes.
somebody, I think I'm lucky, I've been exposed to some different things. When we were in California again, we knew somebody who was part of a renewal group, and they invited us to go to one of their services, and we were kind of like, okay, we'll experience it, and let me tell you. Woohoo! Mary and I are sitting
Pretty
there
fun.
we were sitting there looking at each other like, oh my goodness.
So
Not our thing.
I once wrote a sermon about this that I saw someone in renewal and we were singing Matovu and this woman was in it. She was Matovin, like, right, and I was like, why can't I do that? It's like, why can't I get into that like that? How is she doing that? I'm just singing it.
They
Like,
get the
it is
Holy
amazing.
Spirit.
It is amazing. It is amazing stuff. I mean, if that's your thing, great. You know.
Exactly.
Last, and then I have to move forward, is humanistic, okay? Non-theistic Judaism, okay? It is Judaism that is not based on divine revelation, if you can understand that sentence, okay? Jewish culture, Jewish history, Jewish holidays, Jewish music, Jewish prayer without God, okay? The ideas of blessing each other, blessing the world, celebrating holidays strictly out of historical, cultural lenses. Not as impossible as you might think, friends. There is a great deal part of Judaism that has nothing to do with religion, okay? Remember, Judaism is not a religion, okay? It is a religion plus a race plus a culture plus a nation plus a people. I mean, there are other aspects of us that have nothing to do with theology, okay? There are secular Jews. The fact that that exists, secular Jews, okay? Humanistic Jews are not secular Jews, okay? Secular means typically non-practicing, okay? Humanistics practice. They go to synagogues. They have humanistic synagogues. They have humanistic Sidurim, prayer books, okay? There was one in Cincinnati, Ohio, where our seminary was, and one of our colleagues had an internship over there at HUC. She had to figure out how to change the lyrics to some of our songs, okay? To do it. Yeah.
So then they pray to each other? Then it's,
No, I
everyone
mean,
is God. It's that egalitarian. I mean,
it's not really praying per se. It's singing and embracing each other as a culture, as a tribe, as a
that's true.
that sort of thing. I mean, we're all very tribal, so it makes sense. So if you take God out, there's a lot of prayers that really are just about our history, about Jerusalem, about Jews and Jewish survivability, that sort of thing.
Then,
Okay.
then consider, let's say, the Torah or what we consider theology or whatever. That's just plain history.
History. History. Literary history and allegory. Okay.
Do they celebrate Shabbat?
Yes, they do celebrate Shabbat. Yes, because Shabbat is not necessarily only about God. Shabbat
It's
is
not
about
only, but there's a lot of God in it.
correct, and they did a really great job of taking God out. Okay, highly recommend that if you guys are curious, check them out. They're pretty interesting. Okay, it's an interesting
How do
view.
they view the Torah then?
Literary history, allegory, part of our history. So, you know, I did a in-depth analysis of prayer books during my studies, and I'll be honest, when I got the humanistic one, my first reaction, my visceral reaction was, you can't just do that. But the truth is, you can. They did, and that's what makes them happy. So there's not, I mean, the truth is, what I knew immediately, by the way, when I was studying this, that when I had that visceral reaction, you can't just do that. You can't just change my prayers and do that. Is that there's an Orthodox guy saying that about me. Okay. Okay. That yes, we can actually. There is a reason behind it, and there's thoughtfulness behind it, and we're going to change it. Okay. So all of these denominations, Reconstructionist, Renewal, Humanistic, all the views of Hasidic and Haredim and all that sort of stuff say yes, we can. We make it ours. Okay. To give you an idea, that is not that many denominations for a religion. Okay, it is not that many. All right. This is to say nothing of the cultural differences which we also have: Ashkenazic and Sephardian, North American, South American, Russian, Ethiopian. Okay, these are all just the religious denominations. Okay, culture has a huge impact on what makes a Jew and a synagogue a synagogue. Okay, the time is 3:07. Please take about 5 minutes to stretch, and we will come back and do ideology and allegory. Okay, thank you, friends, for your attention.
Thank you.
We didn't get to this part. I will we'll get to it next time. The 13 principles of the Rambam. We didn't get to that, so that is what we will begin with next time. Okay, and I will print brand new stuff, so don't worry about it.
Here.
All right.
I gotta head to Denver.
Whenever you have to. No problem. No problem. Stay as long as you can.
We have it on,
Did I?
it's
You're
on
driving to
the
Denver.
Yes.
Oh, you did.
I gotta be there by 1:30 in the morning.
Careful.
To me, 1:30 is like night, right? It's not Tuesday morning, it's Monday night. I don't make it.
Hopefully you're not gonna run the daily weather for tomorrow.
I don't think so.
No?
Yeah, I looked it up and it looks like it's all gonna be about the same as it is here. Highs in the 50s.
We've had some rain though, we've had some wind.
Yeah. Actually, I think it's gonna be much warmer.
oh, you're right.
About Christianity.
Christianity?
Oh.
He's been
Okay.
kicked out of churches.
Oh, you have?
Oh, yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Not just-
Tomorrow.
Oh, boy.
Not just one church.
so,
Way to go.
Really?
yeah, I
You
was,
hear it?
right,
He keeps.
I was
It's
raised
just like the
in-
Orthodox.
I was raised in disciples of Christ, which is one. My
Is it like
mother,
an evangelical type church?
no, it was your basis. My mom went
What's
Methodist,
your
my
planner?
father was Church of
Oh,
England.
okay, it's the
I
Purdue
went
Water
to
Board.
Catholic
and
college.
days,
And
most students
over the
was
time,
away
I've
from
been-
lives.
Yeah.
And
you know,
Ryan
I
Fishman.
searched to try to learn. And like the,
So I've been driving myself crazy with this blank for wonder, trying to, I've been on so many websites.
So.
You wouldn't know.
I can add.
I'm still alive, so.
You get emails now that introduce students that I
And
just
some
know, I've
people-
never seen that, yeah.
the elders.
Yeah, just at the rabbis.
Back in the good old analog days.
Yeah.
No questions. Here's the church I went to. Just, yeah, Lutheran.
That's what I mean, pre-digital.
I did. That's why.
So that's at me.
So here's the thing.
I brought in King James version.
If the Bible, I know you know this,
Masonic emblems on it.
Yeah.
Or
if this committee is.
You know the difference between the Masonic King James and the King But the simple.
Wow.
So that things
Well,
So they were.
Kind of.
they want to leave NIV, which is
Right.
one of the.
It's fine. I
Yeah, we ought to be.
But some of these other, like,
Maybe it's the dark, darkness. Maybe
Came in and said, the reason why
Like
this is
Sunday
so great,
afternoon,
and I said, show me in the Bible.
Right.
And he goes, I said, if Jesus could make the wine, you couldn't believe. And it's
always a good
about stuff. They
And if it comes down to it,
There's
no voice.
I'm Carolyn
Nice to meet you,
from the
Carol.
House.
Oh, right. You know, when you mentioned the name, I put two and two together. Right. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the meeting on the
She has
7th, right?
Yeah, we'll be having a
Okay. Great. I think, you know, I'm interested in seeing how the process works. I attended the ceremony here.
But not necessarily
The
here.
board ceremony for the whole process. I'm familiar with it, that there are other activities on campus and in the community as well.
Yeah, well, the ceremony that you came to is a part of
Maybe they're just
our
walking
pop.
over that way and just don't get it.
It's the first time we've done it here, and
Yeah.
that was, you know, because Rabbi said, sure, let's do it.
Right.
And we'll do the same thing this coming month.
Right. Well, I think it's a very worthwhile conference to have. You know, I'm sure more well versed in it than I, but you know, I'm aware that
Yeah.
fewer and fewer people are aware of the circumstances surrounding the Holocaust. And it is definitely something that
Yeah.
Yeah, because he's got
cannot be
another
forgotten.
contact up there.
Well, and so far in Indiana, there's a law that you have to teach about the Holocaust, either in middle school or high school.
I'm
So
shocked knowing India, how retrograde Indiana is in terms of these types of things. Yeah, I can't believe it, really. Well, you know, once in a while they do the right thing.
yes. This was probably really the beginning.
When was this law established? Is it a recent
I was
law?
just trying to think of in what decade or whatever.
Yeah, my suspicion is it's 30 years old.
It's been,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's not a recent development.
Not a recent.
No, right. Yeah, that makes more sense to me, yeah. Yeah, great.
So I
I'm
was
happy,
glad to be
you
here.
introduced yourself. Yeah, great.
Well, I've been a long time member, we've been members maybe 25.
I was in the synagogue,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
Great.
nice to meet
It
you.
was great meeting you.
Is it still your plan to join us on Friday for the jog to Kokomo?
What about that?
Are you going to, Karen said you might want to go to Kokomo.
Yeah.
When is that?
It's this Friday,
Wow,
November 2nd.
I'll have to look at my calendar.
Okay, let her know.
You're not staying overnight.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
And in fact, what we would like, is we talked about this, is pick you up at some
If it's about better.
less than an hour over there in a less than.
All right, friends, I want to respect everyone's time. So let's keep going. We're right on time
See
here.
everybody later.
See you guys.
Drive
Thank
safe.
you. Drive safe. Thank you very
Drive
much. We are going to continue. So welcome. We are going to continue with ideology and allegory, our second class. You're welcome. We're going to shift direction quite a bit. Ideology and allegory. Remember, last time we talked about a lot. But the idea, of course, that we're thinking about here is not if, but when we look at our Torah from a literary criticism point of view, what can we see historically when we look at other cultures, when we look at other things like that? What are the themes that are there? What are the aspects that we take for granted that are not actually there? All of that stuff we're going to go into depth today, okay? Again, with this class, my usual caveat disclaimer is if you are under the belief that the Torah is divine and perfect and came from Sinai, that is great. The sentence to say in response is, we are not going to be discussing that theology today, okay? There's nothing wrong with that theology. That is not the one we're going to be discussing today. So, so what the Orthodox feel or what traditional Judaism and the rabbis felt, we're going to throw all of that out the window, okay? One thing that I want to start with is when we talk about the stories themselves, okay? If you look at the Torah and the Tanakh, frankly, it's a collection of stories, okay? And these stories are what we would say they're mythic, okay? They are, in another culture, they would be called myths, okay? Greek myths and Mesopotamian and Egyptian myths, okay? In our particular religion, they're part of our religion, Torah, whatever you want to say it, okay? But the myth and the stories in the Torah carry the same idea, okay? They are to express things about who we are. They are to teach us. They are to express ideas, real or not, right? The perception of reality is perception, but the idea of things that it would show us about and shape us who we are as a culture, okay? We feel we know things in myths. We don't know them. We feel that we do, okay? Knowledge isn't important. The feeling and emotional attachment to these stories is what's important, okay? So if we take that view and we look at things like Genesis through that lens, okay? Oh, thanks, Deb. The opening stories in Genesis, meaning the creation of the world, meaning Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Abraham, whatever, are mythic, okay? These are mythic in that sense. They teach us things, they express ideas, they give us a feeling about knowledge, okay? However, very, very important distinction between other myths and the Torah, Deb, thanks so much, was the fact that intense work and thought was put in to change them to fit a particular theology. These texts that we read have been redacted and edited and changed to fit the view of what they wanted Judaism to look like, okay? When we notice that and when we accept that, we understand that we miss out on some of the original intents, the original aspects, the original endings, the original parts of these mythic stories, okay? Everything comes from the Near Eastern. The Mesopotamian, Egyptian, Babylonian, Israelite, Canaanite, Amorite, all of them had their myths and things like that, and the Torah what became a hodgepodge of those sort of stories, but then shaped to fit our theology, okay? Which means we miss out on maybe what it was before, okay? Because that wasn't important to the editors. What was important to the editors was that it was Jewish or became Jewish, okay? They are to merge together, and this was something that wasn't common practice. I say this a lot, that the Torah is unique. It is something that was done and created a people in a way that nothing else has, okay? You take aspects of what we'd call a literary inheritance, which means the stories around the campfire, the things that you know, right? Part of your cultural repertoire, and then you merge them with a narrative that can become an anthology of who you are, okay? They didn't have copyright laws back in the day, so they would say, we like this story, but let's make it about this instead. And let's name that character this instead, and that sort of idea, okay? Unique in that way, okay? Usually myths just stay myths, and certain cultures carry myths. The Torah and the Torah authors throughout centuries did some amazing things with that, okay?
So what you're saying, if I
Please.
hearing you correctly, is that there are these myths out there that they're shared by multiple cultures, right? There are multiple flood myths, right?
Yes,
Stories.
exactly, yes.
And so the ones that we find in the Torah start with a myth, and then it is customized to fit the theology of the people that are constructing the Torah.
Very well said. Absolutely. So you have a group of stories we would call Near Eastern literature. Obviously, it wasn't literature at the time. It was just they just spoke about it. They didn't write about it. And you take things and they become this story, which then has to be edited into this story, and all of a sudden that's redacted, and all of a sudden you have a Torah story. Okay, but the origins of that came from here. Okay, that sort of thing, which is why with a flood epic, okay, you have Atrahasis, you have Gilgamesh, you have Noah. Okay, I mean they're all different interpretations of the same mythical understanding. Okay, and throughout the centuries they vary within 500 to 1,000 years of one another. You know, every culture has its own creation story. Every culture has its own flood epic. All of that is comes out of a base of, in this case, Near Eastern literature. The Eastern religions have their own base of literature, but the Abrahamic religions, this is where this began. Okay, so I want to give the example that we'll give is the idea of monotheism. Okay, the idea that Judaism from start to finish was monotheistic is absolute nonsense. It is what the redactors tried to have you believe. It is what the Tanakh authors wanted you to enhance and understand, but that is just not the case. Okay, we can literally see throughout the stories of the Torah and the Tanakh a battle going on between ideologies of what we would call monotheistic, which means there's only one God and there's no other gods, and monolatry. Monolatry is, that's our God rules, your God's son. Okay? We're the best God, mine's the best God, your gods are weak. Not that your gods don't exist. My God can kick your God's butt, right? That's the idea of monolatry. Okay? The Israelites had their own God, and the Egyptians had their God, and Canaanites and Amorites, they all have their gods, their central gods. And, you know, the mythical idea, if you place the Greek myth sort of vision in your head of Mount, what is it? Olympus, right? You have all these gods living together and hanging out together and liking each other or not liking each other. I mean, it is epic, the ideas of these gods. And there are amazing archaeologists who have exposed things that are just incredible theories about who, however we pronounce Adonai now, but Yahweh was, and who El was, and Elyon was, and Baal was, and some are brothers and some are sons. There are epics of that. There are recordings of that. The idea that at a certain point it evolved to where we say Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. But it took a while to get there. Okay? This again is important to remember if we don't think about the Torah in a straight line of history. Okay? You can't think that it begins with Genesis and ends in Chronicles. Okay? Parts of the Torah were written after parts of the Tanakh and vice versa. Okay? See if I, yep. Got all of that. Good. So what we're really going to focus on today is we're going to look at the idea of Adam and Eve and the creation story through the ideas of mortality and immortality. Okay? Genesis 2 meaning Adam and Eve, okay? Meaning the creation of humans, okay? Is what we would call humankind's failure to achieve immortality. This is the myth, okay? This is the original myth, all right? And we're going to unpack and give you all the info you need. The author, yes.
Could you go back a step? Why is there two creation stories there? Because the sixth day God creates man.
Yeah.
And then we have this Adam and Eve story in Garden of Eden, which comes out of seems to be totally contradictory.
Of course. Not the only contradictory aspects of our Torah Tanakh.
There have been suggestions that there were other people outside the Garden of
course.
Eden.
So what you see, Phil, is what they want you to see, whether it makes sense or not.
Okay.
This plugged in and that plugged in and that works kind of, and that plugs right, and then we got to write about this guy, but then that person died. I mean, it is hard work redacting, but the Genesis 1 versus Genesis 2 is a great example. The author of Genesis 1 didn't care what Genesis 2 had to say, okay, and vice versa. Genesis 1 was writing a completely different story for a completely different reason, okay, at a very different time. We get to see them chapter and chapter, but that is not how it was supposed to go, okay? And by the way, please stop me. I know that a lot of this we have covered last year, but there's a lot of stuff that might be bubbling under the surface that please ask for clarification, okay? I never want to leave people behind, all right? So if we look at the ideas of mortality and immortality, and we take the Torah out of it, let's look at the Mesopotamian Ugaritic ideas of Near Eastern literature, specifically Enuma Elish. Okay, so at the top of the next page, you see Enuma Elish is a Mesopotamian story. You can still read it. It's on the tablets. It's about, and look at that date, 1100 BCE. That is old, okay? Parts of the Torah were canonized, written and canonized in the 1st century BCE, okay? It is 1,000 years older, okay, than some of our literature, all right? If you read Enuma Elish, and I gave a little bit here and there about some things about it. Okay, it's a beautiful legend about a god Marduk, who is proclaimed the supreme deity, the head godhead. Okay, among the other deities. Okay, there is a lot of this in our own literature. Okay, that we will unpack. All right. Marduk speaks and brings various things into existence now as he becomes the supreme deity. Just as what we would call Yahweh, Israel's God, so creating humans was one of the things that he did. Okay, brings the world into existence. The theory then is if you have this Mesopotamian myth of a supreme God in a center of other, what we would say, B'nai Elohim, right? Other gods, other little gods, who begins to create the world, that's a good starting spot, okay? That's right here. That's our starting spot. We know it, we love it, let's change it, okay? That's the Torah's motto, I guess, okay? So the idea then is that the biblical author, meaning Genesis 2, Genesis 3, has Yahweh, our Israelite God, not just emulating Marduk, but saying this is the real what happened, replacing it. Okay, saying they are both creators. You can believe about Marduk if you want. We believe in Yahweh. Okay, and we believe Yahweh was the head God and created the world. Okay. Where all of this translate down into the text we're going to get to, because we only see what we can see, okay? But we're still in that idea of up here, okay? So I put a little bit of Enuma Elish in here for you to give it a nice little read, okay? And unto Marduk the firstborn they spake, may thy fate, O Lord, be supreme among the gods, to destroy and to create. Speak thou the word, and thy command shall be fulfilled. Sorry, Beth. Thank you. Okay. Command now, and let the garment vanish, and speak the word again, and let the garment reappear. Magic. Okay? Then he spake with his mouth, and the garment vanished. Again he commanded it, the garment reappeared. In other words, look what I can do. Look how powerful I am. When the gods, his fathers, beheld the fulfillment of his word, they rejoiced and said homage to him, saying, Marduk is king. Meaning, this new God becomes the best God. Even the father gods say, this is the guy. This is the ruler. Look what he can do. He can make clothes disappear and reappear. Okay? So as you read Enuma Elish, and it's long, okay, and other Mesopotamian legends, okay. Oh, hi.
Hello, everyone.
How are you?
I just called. How are you?
Oh, yeah. Come and join us, please.
I am.
If you read Enuma Elish, and I think that you should, I think that you can find it online very easily, or there's books of Mesopotamian literature. Give it a read. It's pretty interesting. It is poetry, okay, so you have to sort of unpack it or whatever it is. But those make it clear that it's the gods, and gods in plural, that create human beings, and human beings are meant to serve the gods. It's not out of generosity that the gods create human beings, not because we like how they look, okay? They wanted servants, okay? And those humans would be B'Tselem Elohim. They would look just like us, okay? They would be in the image of the gods. This is Mesopotamian cultural literature myth, okay? So, if we take that, finally, gods and Mesopotamian legends. Mesopotamian gods get tired, they get hungry, they die, okay? They war against each other, all right? There's a story in Enuma Elish about the old gods complaining about the noise that the young gods are making, okay? There's literally a story about that, okay? So the first fetchers of the Mesopotamian, okay, they have this, meaning they can't rest, which means gods, according to Near Eastern literature, eat and sleep, okay? They are not omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, okay? These are much later ideas that Israelite authors came up with and brought, okay? So, and this, by the way, fits very well with Greek myths and Egyptian myths and other things like that. If you read about all these other aspects of gods, they get hungry, they get sleepy, they die, they're born, they have kids. There's a whole network of gods that live on those holy mountains, Olympus or otherwise, okay? And last year we read some of this stuff that sort of, you can see, resembled some of this stuff that made it still into Israelite literature, and we'll do that again, okay? So here's that part here. They consulted on a plan with regard to the gods. Their sons, Apsu, which is another god, opened his mouth and spake unto Tiamat, the glistening one was his name. Awesome. He addressed their word their way. By the way, the periods are because it's a broken tablet. We only have what we have, okay? By day I cannot rest, by night I cannot lie down in peace, but I will destroy their way. I will something, let there be lamentation, and let us lie down again in peace. They get angry at each other, they're gonna hurt each other. This is the story of the gods in Near Eastern literature have their own story. Forget human stories. They have their own issues, okay? Which then come down and get with all of us, okay? If we look at what we would call the Israelite version of this, the Israelite God, Yahweh, we'll call God Yahweh here, okay? In Genesis, but also in Exodus specifically, God gets tired, okay? 6 days, Yahweh made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day, he ceased from work and revived himself, okay? God needed rest. That doesn't work with, again, Jewish theology, which we're putting to the side right now, because God doesn't need rest. God is the ultimate powerful, blah, 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 okay? But in mythic literature, it makes perfect sense that if a God creates the world, God needs to rest. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Okay, if we see it through the lens of Near Eastern literature, of course God would need to rest. Gods get tired, okay? This makes sense through that lens,
Isn't
okay?
that why we had Sabbath? It's because God rested?
That's what the Genesis 1 writer wanted you to
Okay,
believe.
okay.
Yes. Totally different idea, but yes.
Okay.
Yes. Like I said, the modern reader, the modern Jew who believes God is omnipotent, requiring no rest, would have no understanding of this. You think modern Jews pick up Enuma Elish and understand? We just don't read it. So you can't understand something unless you are exposed to it, okay? You would have no understanding other than what you are taught. If you are taught that God is omnipotent, it says God rested, that has to mean something else. what does that mean? If God, and then you get the rabbis saying, well, it meant this, this, or this. They have completely missed the mythical point, if that makes sense. Okay? They would never imagine the author of Genesis 1 who creates the world this way. Okay? This super God and the power of endurance, 6 days of crazy creation. Okay? In Psalm 121, God does not slumber. Okay? They said that in Psalm 121. The God of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Not like your gods who get tired. My guy doesn't get tired. Okay? Everything has a reason behind it. Okay? If we keep going. Now, I want us to take a step back, and we're doing a great job in envisioning where we are. If we look at Genesis 1, okay, all we see is what we're supposed to see. Okay, it is not like any other Near Eastern creation stories because they didn't want it to be like any other creation stories. Okay, that being said, just as the exercises that we do about motif adaptation and genre adaptation, the basic points are there. If you know how to identify those basic points, you can find them of what was the cultural repertoire of the Near East. Meaning, if you put the Genesis 1 authorship surrounded by Enuma Elish and Atrahasis and Gilgamesh and all that sort of stuff, you see something different than if you put it alone or put it in Jewish theology. Okay? You can only see things that you are able to see. Just like with motif adaptation, you only see an adaptation when you have both in front of you. Otherwise, it's just a great story. Okay? You need both in front of you. Okay? This is the really cool stuff, right? This is really fun stuff, okay? Israel's God, who we'll call Yahweh, of course, was not alone when the world was created, okay? Vayomer Elohim na'aseh Adam betzelmenu, okay? That is plural across the board, okay? Elohim is plural. Gods. I don't care what Rabbi Shlomo whatever says. Elohim is plural. Okay? The rabbis will understand this as the plurality of God. Fine. It is plural. Okay? Genesis 1:26. And Elohim, meaning the gods, said, let us make na'aseh. Let us make a being who will have bitzelmenu, our form and appearance. Plural across the board. If we view this through Judaism, we've got a lot to explain. And the rabbis did a lot of work to try to explain it. Okay? All you have to do is read Ibn Ezra and Sforno and all these other rabbis. They do a fine job of explaining it. If you see it through the lens of Ugaritic and Mesopotamian and Babylonian literature, of course there is. Of course there were other gods. There's always other gods. And this is something they like to do. They like to create humans that look like them. It makes perfect sense. Okay? In Genesis 3:22, okay, Vayomar Adonai Elohim. Okay, when you see Adonai Elohim together, okay, sometimes in the Hebrew, all right, you'll see what we call the tetragrammaton, which we pronounce as Adonai, and Elohim. Elohim. Next to each other. Okay? You'll see this translated in JPS as Lord God or something, Adonai Elohim. But Adonai Elohim or Yahweh Elohim, if looked through the right lens, literally means Yahweh of the gods. Okay? Which is how mythical gods were referred. Marduk is referred to Marduk and the other gods. Yahweh and the gods. Okay? Again, in the plural. Okay? Hem ha'adam haya ka'achar mimenu. The human has become mimenu, like us. Okay? Lada'at tov v'ra'a, cognizant of good and evil. Okay? V'ata pen yishlach yado v'lekach gam me'etz hachayim v'achal yachei leolam. And if he's going to reach for the tree of eternal life, he will become immortal. The gods have a problem on their hands. When Adam and Eve eat the tree of knowledge and evil, knowledge of good and evil, they become one step closer to God. And all they have to do is eat another apple, and they will literally be gods. That's the conundrum of Genesis 2. Okay? I mentioned here other aspects of, see you guys soon. Have fun. Other aspects of monolatry that we might see. Exodus 15:11, Micha mocha ba'elim Adonai. Micha mocha ba'elim Adonai. Who is like you, like the other gods? Okay? If you ask my Orthodox friend, they will tell me that Elim, which is clearly the word for gods, means mighty. The mighty ones, not necessarily gods. Okay, fine. Fine. The poetry of Song of the Sea, of Shirat Hayam, is such a beautiful monolatrous song. Our God's the best. Our God is the most powerful. Your God can't do what our God's doing. It is a beautiful, beautiful poem of a monolatrous, not a monotheistic group. Okay? When monotheism did arrive, meaning that particular theology. Now remember that these two theologies, monolatry and monotheism, probably existed side by side. Just like we have other denominations, same thing, okay? People said, no, there's only one. No, ours is the best, okay? History is written by the victor, okay? They write different passages that say, no, this is what it is. No, this is what it is. No, this is what it is. And they fight against each other. You can see this in the Tanakh. It's pretty amazing. Okay, which authors are saying, no, this is our God. And they're like, no, this is our God. Okay? 2 Samuel 7:22. You are great indeed, O Lord Yahweh. There is none like you. There is no other God but you, as we have always heard. Burn. Okay? As we have always heard. All right? Everyone knows there's only one God, guys, is what 2 Samuel is saying. That is not true. That is what the author wants you to read. Okay? Exodus 15. None like you meant something different. Okay? In Exodus 15, Shirat Hayam, when we say the other gods, who is like you like the other gods, that's monolatry. Isaiah, extremely monotheistic. Isaiah and Jeremiah are fiercely monotheistic. Okay, very, very strong monotheism. In Isaiah 45:6, I am Yahweh, there are no other gods besides me. Okay, we still sing that sometimes, okay? The idea that God self-proclaims that there are no other gods is a tactic of our monotheistic authors to say we're changing the story here, guys. Okay? We don't know exactly how that struggle went or when or whatever it is, but we can assume that monotheism probably came afterwards. Okay? That it was probably the second idea. Okay? And it probably wasn't dominant for a long time. Eventually it was. Okay, certainly by the time you get into the kingdoms and the split kingdoms and that sort of stuff, you definitely have a monotheistic view. But for a long time, probably centuries, it wasn't. But then it stuck. That one won. Okay, so we cannot very well criticize the monotheistic writer because he won. Okay, we're now a monotheistic religion. Okay. So all of this in mind, friends, let us take the Adam and Eve story, okay? If you ask, depending on who in the Jewish religion or in the Christian religion or the Muslim religion, you ask what is the purpose of the Adam and Eve story, they've got a different answer, okay? We're going to see what the original purpose might have been, Okay? If you take the ideas that we have before about let us make humans in our image and God has, we've created humans and they're immortal, whatever it is, we can break that apart and say that the original narrative, the core, okay, was probably mythological, okay? And we end up, after the editors, with something different. But if we clear away the edits, if we clear away the redactions, if we clear away the monotheistic and the Deuteronomic and ideas that have infected it, okay, we end up with a legend that instructs Israelites as to the difference between humans and gods, what separates humans and gods, okay? Gods were immortal, but not necessarily eternal. Gods could die, okay, in the Near East. They could live forever, or they could be murdered, okay? They could be killed. Enuma Elish, for instance, significant deities, Tiamat and Kingu, they die. Okay, we see a little bit of this in Psalm 82. We see God literally murdering or threatening to murder other gods. This helps us understand, therefore, the reason for the creation of humans. Okay, if gods are not necessarily eternal, we become their offspring. Let us make something in our image, if we think about it at the most fundamental level, is children. Okay? Make something that is fundamentally like yourself, offspring. Okay? Humans look, therefore, like gods, but the two things that separate gods and humans are knowledge of good and evil and immortality. Okay? So that's how we're going into this story. Okay? The idea of the serpent, the snake, understands that the gods are lying to the humans when they say, if you eat of the tree of knowledge, you will die. The serpent understands the ruse. Gods have created humans, put them in a garden, and there are two trees in this garden, knowledge of good and evil and eternal life. Okay? God says to Adam and Eve, don't eat this one. Okay, because you'll die. The serpent knows better. Okay, this is just a threat of instantaneous death, which we find out is not true. It's not true at all. Okay, it is God's attempting to keep humans from being close to their knowledge. Okay, if Adam and Eve had eaten from both, they would be gods. Okay. Since they only ate of the tree of knowledge, they became 2/3, okay? And 2/3 of a god's characteristic, also known in Gilgamesh, was 2/3 God. God boots them out before they can finish it, okay? They fail to grab the fruit of life and do not acquire immortality. That's the legend, friends, okay? That's the legend. And what I've done is I'm going to give you here the JPS translation and what might have been. Okay? Very cool. All right? And God said, and this is JPS translation, meaning Jewish Publication Society, fully approved Jewish view. Okay? And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. The Lord God took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to till and tend it. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree in the garden you are free to eat, but as for the tree of knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat of it. For as soon as you eat of it, you shall die. Other stuff happens. Now the serpent was the shrewdest of the wild beasts that Lord God had made. He said to the woman, did God really say, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? The woman replied to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the other trees of the garden. It is only the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden that God said, you shall not eat of it or touch it lest you die. And the serpent said to the woman, you are not going to die. God knows that as soon as you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like divine beings who know good and bad. When the woman saw that the tree was good for eating and a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable as a source of wisdom, she took its fruit and ate. She also gave some to her husband, and he ate. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they perceived that they were naked. And they sewed themselves together fig leaves and made themselves loincloths. Other things happened. They heard the sound of the Lord God moving about the garden in the breezy time of day, and the man and the wife hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. The Lord God called out to the man and said, "Where are you?" He replied, "I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." Then he, meaning God, asked, "Who told you you were naked? Did you eat of the tree from which I had forbidden you to eat?" And the man said, "The woman you put at my side, she gave me the tree, and I ate." And the Lord God said to the woman, "What is this you have done?" The woman replied, "The serpent duped me, and I ate." Blah, 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 blah. And the Lord God said, "Now the man has become like one of us, knowing good and bad. What if he should stretch out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever?" So the Lord God banished him from the Garden of Eden to till the soil from he was taken. He drove man out and stationed east of the Garden of Eden the cherubim and the fiery, ever-turning sword to guard the way to the tree of life. That's JPS, friends. Hopefully, in reading it, you are already seeing some things, okay? In terms of some problematic elements, okay? Besides the stuff that we just talked about, if you are a monotheistic Israelite Jew, you see some problems. You have to explain them, okay? You have no understanding that we are like divine beings for eating tree of knowledge. We have no understanding of the us, okay? We have no understanding as to the ruse and the why behind it. There are lots of problems here, okay? If we then take this idea, this core of this story, and we remove those elements, okay? If we peel away the later authors, I try to Israelitize that story, we get this story, okay? Very, very cool story, which I will read, okay? The gods said, "Let us make humans to serve us, that resemble us in an appearance and form, only lacking immortality and understanding." The gods did just that. They created the creature known as Adam to resemble themselves in appearance, male and female. Yahweh, the Lord God, the chief God, placed the male and female in the Garden of Eden and said, "Of every tree in the garden you are free to eat, but as for the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you shall not consume its fruit. As soon as you eat of it, you shall die." Now the serpent, being shrewd, grasped the divine ruse, meaning he figured it out. He approached the woman and said, "Did God say, 'You shall not eat of the tree of the garden?'" The woman replied to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the garden trees, only regarding the tree in the middle of the garden. God said, 'You shall never eat of it, nor touch it, lest you die.'" The serpent responded, "This is not true. If you eat of that tree, you're not going to die. The gods know that as soon as you eat of it, that tree you will grasp what is good and evil, and you will become just like gods." So the woman ate of the tree of knowledge and did not die. She shared the fruit with the tree of the man, and he did not die. At that moment, Yahweh, supreme among the gods, was moving about the garden. The man and the woman hid, and Yahweh called to them. Upon finding them, he suspected that they had eaten of the tree of knowledge. To the other gods, Yahweh proclaimed, "Now that man and woman have become like us in knowing good and evil. Should he stretch out his hand and take from the tree of immortality, he will rival us and live forever." At that moment, Yahweh drove them out of the garden and prevented their return by stationing cherubim and a fiery, ever-turning sword to guard against the tree of immortality. Okay? Now that is a cool story with a very different lesson. Okay? There is no original sin in that lesson. There is no apple in this lesson. Okay? The part about how, the serpent will strike at the heel and none of that's important. What's important is the gods had an idea. like any other creation stories. Let's create humans. They'll serve us. It'll be great. We got a nice little garden for them to till for us. We got animals for them to play with. Wonderful. Okay. But even gods cannot control everything. There is a tree of immortality and there is a tree of knowledge of good and evil. It simply exists. So they can't erase it from existence. Instead, they lie to their creation and say, don't eat it. Stay the way you are. Okay? Not thinking that there were other things that might tell them, might tell the humans, hey, if you eat this, you'll be like them. They get 2/3 of the way done. They eat the tree of knowledge of good and evil. They gain wisdom that the gods have. And all they'd have to do, as God says, is eat one more piece of fruit and they'd be right up here with us. That's not what we wanted. We got to stop this. We got to fix this. Yeah.
But if they instead chose from the fruit of immortality before knowledge.
They'd also be 2/3. They'd
They-
live
they-
forever, but they'd be idiots. Right? I mean, they wouldn't have godly knowledge. They wouldn't have divine knowledge. They would be something that lives forever-ish, you know, but they wouldn't contain the wisdom of God. Right? So it's one or the other. Yeah.
So in addition to like wisdom, knowledge, as we understand knowledge, to me, the knowledge of good and evil speaks of the ability to have free will. That
Yes.
once we know the difference between good and bad,
Correct.
we have free will now to be able to choose between which one we want to employ.
And there are rabbis who would interpret it that that's how we got free will.
Okay.
Right? Certainly, the idea of the knowledge of what is good and bad, meaning you understand the difference, right? You then therefore make a choice.
Which is why when
Right.
people will say, how could God let this terrible thing happen?
Right.
My understanding is God didn't make that happen. You should excuse me, but Hitler had free will. He
Right,
chose to
right.
be evil. God didn't do
Right.
that.
Humans then now have their own will to be either good or evil, which places them in the mythic idea, the idea that gods have. Gods are powerful in immortality, right? We are mortal, but when we say, when the idea of Judaism, B'Tselem Elohim, that we are made in the divine image, it is not some mythical sort of hippie spatial idea. It comes from the idea that we look just like them. Okay, that was the point. We are the children of gods, according to the Near Eastern legend. Okay, very cool. All right, now that was all changed when Israelite culture began to put in this, and all of a sudden the story is taken, and now it becomes our Genesis story. And now look at how popular it is. Okay, and now the things that are now a part of our Torah. Okay, so when we are unpacking these theories in terms of what could have been and that sort of stuff, okay, we have to understand that this is a big line. And I did this when we talked about the mistake that I think exists in terms of kashrut. But if you have an idea, and it leads to, so say Adam and Eve, JPS version, whatever it is, and then you have, that leads to the rabbinic understanding, and that leads to this, and that leads to this, and all of a sudden we've got Orthodox Judaism. If you say, yeah, but that actually came from over here, all this stuff falls over. We can't do that, okay? So, once it was built up, there was no stopping it, okay? Which is fine, it's how religions are built, right? By the time that the Torah was codified in the 1st century, these ideas of monotheism and the ideas of Adam and Eve, which then begot Cain and Abel, and all these other things had already been put in place. Okay, that religion became the religion of the Jews, which then expanded, and now here we are in 2018. Okay, so this is going way back to saying how this thing was formed. Okay, now remember, and again, this is not a problem, but if you look at this from a scholarly point of view, eventually they realized that that was there, and they had to do something else. So they had to create another origin story. Okay, meaning the idea, and I talked about this before, the idea that the Torah is divine is a relatively late idea in Judaism. It is very late, okay, because they needed to protect it from this sort of thing. If you show the understanding that the Torah dropped out of the sky in Sinai, written by God himself, none of this matters. None of that matters. You've got a brand new creation story. Your prequel then defines the movie, okay? And we see that it worked. Again, we can't criticize it. It worked. It worked quite well. There are 6 billion people on the planet who believe it, but in one way or the other, right? But we cannot erase the mythological components that are there, that exist. We cannot simply state that the Torah was written in a vacuum. It was not. We see evidence of that on both sides. And what I mean by that is we see things that far too much resemble our stories that predate them. And we see stuff in our Tanakh and our Torah which are far too close to other mystical stories, okay? So we see the relationship there. If we see it, if we are allowed to see it. The rabbis, the Midrash and the Mishnah and the Talmud worked extremely hard for you not to see it.
Why?
Why? To preserve the religion. They worked extremely hard for you to have the answer before you ask the question.
Oh.
How far
Okay.
back does all this go?
Hard to say, Kathy. I would say, parts of the Torah are written 500 BCE, parts are written 300, parts are written 1,000, parts are, there's all kinds of things. It's hard to say. I'm currently studying with the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the Dead Sea Scrolls are dated to 3rd century BCE, and they're the oldest manuscripts that we see, but they are not the first, right? They are copied or whatever. And there is a whole mess of stuff that we don't see anywhere else that didn't make it, okay? So the idea is, think of it as the canonization moment, right? And it wasn't a straight line, right? I mean, stuff was pulled in and rearranged, and that is the literary criticism idea, the scholarly understanding of how our canon was created, okay? I always want to point out that when we study like this, right, the inevitable question is, what about holiness? Is it still holy if it doesn't come from God? In fact, I've said this before. An Orthodox rabbi friend of mine said, if you take away the divine aspect of Torah, is Judaism just an intellectual exercise? The truth is, no, I do not believe that. The fact that the Torah created a people makes it holy. The fact that we still read it today sanctifies it. Okay, there is holiness in understanding that I am reading Genesis 2 just like 3,000 years or 2,000 years ago, someone was reading Genesis 2. There is holiness in that. And the other thing that I'll say is that, and the Orthodox will disagree with me, and that's fine. If you take the divine aspect out of the authorship of the Torah, that has nothing to do with whether or not God exists. It simply has something to do with whether or not God authored the Torah. So we still pray to God, and we still have different concepts of God that have arisen much later. God became omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent long after the Torah was canonized. Okay, these are later ideas. Some are even medieval ideas.
And the idea
okay?
of monotheism.
Yeah.
That started for us as Jews with Abraham, correct? Or
that's what they want you to see. That's what they want you to see. They want you to see that Abraham was the first monotheist. It doesn't explicitly say that in the Abraham story, actually. There are wonderful stories in Jeremiah and Kings and these sort of things about fighting against. Elijah the prophet does this amazing, awesome exercise with all the Baal prophets. He says, you call to your God, I'll call to my God. And they start chanting and yelling. And literally Elijah says, what's the problem? Maybe you're not yelling loud enough. Elijah is mocking the Baal priests for believing that they actually have a God. That's much later, right? That's much, much later, these ideas, okay?
So when you say that this is what they want you to see, okay, so that's one thing. That's what they want us to see. One of the things that I think is beautiful about Judaism and that separates us, well, at least Reformed Jews, that's not from Orthodox Jews, for instance, or they even question too, but long story short, we're allowed to question.
Yes.
So are you suggesting that this is what they wanted us to see means that Judaism or Jews or Israelites or whoever, we weren't always a questioning, doubting
100%,
people?
Beth. The idea of questioning is so late.
Okay.
I mean, I'm talking 18th century
Okay.
late.
Wow, really?
The idea that you would question whether or not God exists,
Or what the
there was a
rabbi
word
said.
for that back
Okay.
then. It was death, okay? It was blasphemy. You would never even conceive of the notion. Remember that Midrash and Mishnah and Talmud and all these other things were written through the lens that the Torah is perfect, meaning centuries of authors just assumed this, right? It simply was, there was no way around it. This is simply how it was. Our literature is built upon that idea. Much later
Wow, okay.
did we have the idea, again, as Reformed Jews do, and frankly, there were things before that in terms of maybe, yes, whatever, but the idea of questioning being acceptable, not the idea of questioning. People question all the time. Whether it being, the fact that it is acceptable is very, very late.
Wow,
Absolutely,
really?
Judaism, like any other religion, before it in the tribal aspect was this is the way it is, and if you don't like it, get out. That's just how it is, right? I mean, so very difficult for us, and that's why in terms of the historical distance that we want to do, very difficult for us in 2018 as Reformed Jews, which had been built on rabbinic Judaism, these sort of things, to go way back and envision this stuff. But we can do it, right? But we have to take ourselves out of that, take off those glasses, right? Because our glasses have been built for literally millennia. We have 2,000 years, almost more than that, 2,500 years of understandings that guide our principles, that guide our theology, that lead us to ask the questions that we want to ask. Exactly. Yes.
What is it saying on translation? Let us make man. Let us.
Yeah.
Let us refer God.
What do the rabbis say about
As
that?
as us, well, plural.
The rabbis say, and the commentators say, depending on who, one is that God is speaking in the royal we. Okay, kings would speak in we. Okay, that's one. The other one is that God was speaking with the aspects of nature. Let all of us do it. The other is that God was speaking to the angels. Okay, there's all kinds of explanations that keep God, one God,
But
right?
This is us, plural.
But if you, and here's the thing, if you remove, and again, I cannot criticize them. It worked, okay? I cannot criticize them, okay? But if you remove all that stuff and it says, take all that stuff out of your head and it says, let us make man in our image, would the first thing you think be the royal we? No, you'd say there's a bunch of people. I mean, that is simply logic behind it. But again, how much we have put onto this and stacked onto us, guide us into that way, okay? Pretty cool, huh?
It is
Yeah.
amazing.
Cool. All right, friends.
That's-
Right. Let me end here. So very, very cool.